Okay, so I'm going to be talking about GDPR in this short video, and I'm going to be giving you a little bit of a summary of how it works if you are at all confused. And you wouldn't be blamed for being confused because it has been a little complicated. But actually, it's quite simple. So GDPR was brought in to help the industry, the data industry, basically. We've got personally identifiable information, which is a first name and a last name and a mobile telephone number or a cookie, something like that. And that information is being processed by companies. And in some circumstances, it can be processed in a way that might not be fair. So, for instance, using facial recognition now, there are some systems out there that could be doing stuff that we actually we don't agree with, and we would like to know what is going on with that information, whether it's a company that is recognizing or tracking us in a building where we work, and all sorts of stuff. There needs to be some control here because there's some pretty. I mean, I love technology. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I love technology. But I've seen technology that will identify a human in a room, and with the correct integrations, it will identify that person. And then it can track them in that room or in that building or in that area. And it's pretty terrifying if there's no controls over this. And GDPR is designed to bring some controls in. I'm not talking about the police and stuff. I mean, my opinions on that are quite simple. You know, if you've got nothing to hide, then you've got nothing to fear. But when it comes to corporations using this technology in order to create some kind of advertising campaign or something, you know, it's there's got to be a level of control in there. And this is what GDPR was designed to do, to any company that is processing this personally identifiable information where it can actually identify you as a living human resident in the EU, they have to follow the rules. And the rules, number one, is that they have to have a lawful basis for processing that data. When I say number one, I believe it's the most important rule. They have to have a lawful basis for processing that data. And that lawful basis could be consent. So I've given you consent to process my information, no problem. It could be a legal obligation, so that like payroll, you know, that company, your employer is legally obliged to process that information and maintain it for a period of time, and all sorts of stuff. There has to be a lawful basis, which obviously stops companies that are using the data maliciously from processing it. So they by default are now breaking the law because they weren't doing good stuff with your data. They could not find a lawful basis and therefore have had to remove that data and stop doing what it is that they were doing. So it's a good thing that this has happened. It's also tightened up security around data, which means that if you are processing data as a company, then you need to have certain safety measures in place to protect it so that it makes it more difficult for it to be stolen if you are breached. And there's all sorts of simple techniques to do that. Encryption, not keeping data if you don't need it. There's so many different ways, and there's a lot of suggestions. If you read through GDPR, you'll see that a lot of the conditions in that are actually, if you reverse them, they're suggestions, or they're telling you how to behave around data and how to protect yourselves. But data still does get stolen in large volumes and is made available at a price, and it's still happening. But it's GDPR is designed to make it more difficult. Now, that said, it created a lot of confusion in the marketplace where companies are buying data. The direct marketing marketplace, huge marketplace here in the UK, across Europe. Direct marketing is where you've got first name and last name and some kind of contact information on an individual, and you're trying to send information to them to promote your products and services, yeah? And that's an integral part of our economy. It's massive. And it generates, I guess, billions, if not, well, hundreds of billions of dollars, pounds of revenue for us. So it wasn't designed to stop that. That GDPR was not designed to kill direct marketing. But a lot of companies that didn't understand GDPR and Data Protection Act and even PECA, the Privacy Electronic Communications Regulation, thought that this was a piece of legislation that was designed to stop any kind of direct marketing, and it wasn't at all. In fact, it was just to give guidelines, really. One instance in particular is to demonstrate this is that direct marketing was listed as a legitimate interest. Specifically, if you are using the data for direct marketing, then you can use legitimate interest to process that information inside your company as your lawful basis. Okay? And that is really important. So it's really important that definition or you need to distinguish between what you think you can do and what you can't do. And that is this bridge legitimate interest. And it's been spoken about so much in B2B, because it's where B2B email marketing falls, really. You see, business subscribers, or what we refer to as corporate subscribers, are treated the same under GDPR as individual subscribers. If you can identify a living human, you've got to protect that data, and you've got to follow the law. You've got to have a legitimate interest, a lawful basis, etc., etc. However, where there is a difference, and this is where the confusion came in, is under PECA, Privacy Electronic Communications Regulation. So if you are sending to that information, that personally identifiable information, if you're sending an email to it, there's another layer of legislation. And this is where it became a little bit complicated, but it's actually very simple. And it breaks down into this. If they are corporate subscribers, so they're a UK limited company, PLC, and some sole traders, you can send information to those people, okay? If they are individual subscribers, so it's first name, last name, home address, home telephone number, mobile telephone number, and their personal email address, you need to have consent. You can't use legitimate interest, okay? You can only use consent. So if you're sending to corporations, you can use legitimate interest. You do have to be registered with the ICO, and you've got to make sure you are compliant with GDPR, because it is still relevant to you, but you can send to them. As long as you have got privacy notifications, links to privacy policies, etc. And of course, allowing people to unsubscribe and being clear about who it is that the email is coming from and all that kind of stuff. So that's really important to understand, the difference between those two. So that means that you can buy data. You are allowed to go out into the marketplace, find a company that has got corporate data, individuals within organisations, their email address, so john.walker@bbc.co.uk, and you can buy that information and you can send an email to that person, so long as you include a privacy statement in that email at the very latest in your first communication. So you have to communicate to them that you're processing their information, and at the very latest in your first communication with them. That's important. And then, of course, subsequent communications need to have links to your privacy policy and all that kind of stuff. So that gives organisations a clear way through to business prospecting. And it was done on purpose because it's such a large part of what we do. GDPR, therefore, if you think about it, was designed to help us improve security around data, and where we are processing information on individual subscribers, obtain their consent. And consent is a very different animal to legitimate interest. Consent really must be informed consent, so that person knows what it is you're doing with their data and can stop you doing it. And it has to be very clear and unambiguous. So if you use consent, you have to know exactly what it is that you are obliged to do in terms of GDPR and PECA. If you are using legitimate interest, then at the very least, you need to have security within your organization. You have to be registered with the ICO, all that kind of stuff. But when you're sending to those people, if they unsubscribe, then you have to remove them from your list. So that gives you a little bit of an overview of GDPR and why it's been so good for the industry and how you can continue to use business prospecting to generate leads into your company. So one of the things that I often hear is, I've got some data, it's a CRM system, and I've got a mix of personal email addresses, and I've got a mix of limited companies, work domains. How do I know which I need to have consent for and which I don't? Now that is a really tough question. But theoretically, a year ago, you got all of this in place and you knew the source of each one of your email addresses, and you were able to identify which are corporate subscribers and which are individual subscribers. And where you didn't have consent, you were able to remove them. And where you had a corporate subscriber, you were able to use legitimate interest. That's the process that you should have gone through. So it would have meant that you had been deleting data, which is obviously never great for a company. But if you have had to go through that process and you've seen a drop off in your data, the good thing is that you can now go back into the marketplace and you can buy data to replace it. The data that you buy, it's important that you remember your approach is going to have to be different. Okay? These people have not come to you and asked you for information about your product. They've not gone to a website and entered their email address and tried to get something from you, and in return you're now sending them some messages. That is not how prospect data works. You need to go through a journey with those people, and that journey needs to start with some kind of an introduction. It needs to start with some kind of messaging that will create engagement. Otherwise, you're trying to skip over some of the steps that will eventually lead to a good piece of engagement from that person. So it's important that you don't skip over those or skim over those important steps. When you're buying data in, treat it gently, use it carefully, and remember you're creating relationships with these people. So that gives you a little bit of an overview of GDPR, and it gives you an overview of what you can do in terms of business-to-business email marketing, email prospecting, and at the end there a little bit about how to do it. Okay, so one of the things that I'm going to just touch on here is MailChimp. So we get a lot of companies. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to just touch on here is MailChimp. So I get a lot of people coming to me that use MailChimp that are looking to source business-to-business email prospect data. And I'm always quite cautious to say during the process I go through with them how they're going to send to it. And a lot of them say, I'm going to send to it using MailChimp. It's really important that you note you cannot upload data into MailChimp if you do not have consent from those individuals. You may get away with it. You may put it into your system and send to it. You may be getting away with it right now. But if MailChimp were to see that that data had been purchased and uploaded into their system, they could freeze your account. They could even cancel your account. So data that you buy in or data that you collect online, not directly from that person, but from going to LinkedIn or however it is, must not be uploaded into MailChimp. You must use a purpose-built system So for doing B2B email, there are a number of different systems out there. We have our own system, Mail, of course, but we've also used a number of different systems. And you can find out more about those systems if you reach out to me. There's quite a few. One of the most successful ones that we've used, or when I say most successful, one of the platforms that creates the most engagement is an application called reply.io, and that actually bolts into Gmail, and I can upload my list, I can upload my content, which is normally an introductory email. Hi, my name is Duncan, I'm the email guy. I'm just wondering whether or not you are responsible for email there at XYZ company. I would love to know a little bit more about where you source your data or all that kind of stuff. And it sends that out for me, but it sends it out one at a time. And it sends out a sequence of messages. So if that person doesn't respond to that email within maybe a week or two, it will send out follow-up emails saying, just wondering if you got my email. And there's a few applications like that come to the market recently. And they're very powerful. I've seen open rates on cold prospect data in the mid 30% range. What's important though is that you don't go hell for leather on those systems. I think that you're able to do somewhere in the region of about 100 to 200 a day per account, because obviously you're using Gmail, and for a lot of people it's either a free tool or it is a tool with a minimum spend on it of some sort like that. And if you start pushing thousands of emails through it, it's not what it was designed for, and Gmail won't like that. So they do have thresholds, but I've had some really good, interesting results from that. So that gives you a little bit of an idea about what to do if you are using MailChimp with B2B prospecting. So thanks for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Okay, bye.